Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. We are out here on the river this morning, and I want to share with you guys the reason why we created this guy right here. This is the 2/0 1/4-ounce swim jig by Core Tackle. This is just such a little killer swim jig that most companies don't offer. There's a lot of swim jigs on the market. You know, we created the original swim jig, which is the, I guess you could say, the 4/0 version in both a 1/4 and a 3/8 ounce size for all of those swim jig fanatics out there. You know, we built it off the tush hook, which is an internally weighted swim bait hook. And we built it so that you could have that core weight further back into the swim jig. I'll show you more about that later, but it just increases the rolling action of your swim jig. But I've always made a smaller version for myself to be primarily geared towards your spotted bass as well as your smallmouth on some of these smaller rivers. You know, when you're talking about spotted bass and smallmouth, they've got just a smaller mouth, but really what they like to do is just kind of peck at the bait. They really like to hit those smaller profile baits. They like to come up and slap it. And I was missing a lot of fish with the larger hooks, the larger profiled swim jigs. So we created the 2/0. Now that's something, again, that I've been using for a long time. I was actually pouring my own smaller swim jigs with smaller hooks just to give me a better hookup percentage. And I found that it was just a killer because you're actually fishing a much smaller profile. Just like how you would throw like a little 2.8 or 3.3 swim bait, there's a lot of advantages to throwing a smaller bait, especially on lakes that are heavily fished with swim jigs. They just haven't seen that small swim jig profile. So I'm going to show you how I like to fish it, how I like to use it, why I use it, kind of give you the pairings, the trailer that I like to put on it, and just show you how good a little 2/0, you know, our little baby swim jig will work. So let's get on the river here. Hopefully we can catch a few fish. We're going to get bit by a ton of mosquitoes, but it'll be worth it. So we're going to take our little 2/0 1/4-ounce swimmer here. Now the first thing I want to point out is the newer models are actually coming with the skirt trimmed a little shorter. So the first thing I'm going to do when I take this out is trim it down so that it's about, I'm going to say, a 1/2 inch to a 1/4 inch past the hook. We left it longer because some people do like the longer skirts, but in reality I like to have it so that it's not going to hang up on the trailer. You know, if your skirt's too long, it hangs up on the trailer. So I'm just going to tie this on right now. Now, I get a lot of questions. Every time I do a knot, I get people asking me, what kind of knot is that? Well, I'm tying a Miller knot, and I got videos that show you how to do it. Basically, you just go through your hook eye twice, take the tag end, wrap it twice around your line, go back through both holes you've created, make a figure 8, so you've got your little 8 right there, wet it, pull it tight. This is my absolute favorite knot right now, guys. Just the dynamite knot. Find my scissors, cut my tag end off. Okay, so there's our tiny little swim jig. Now what I'm going to do is I like a small boot tail generally, so this is actually the 3.5 inch grass pig, the Berkley Power Bait grass pig. Now in this case, because I'm fishing a river with smallmouth, I like to keep chartreuse and white with a white colored trailer. Now in this case, this trailer works just fine on this, but I'm also going to trim it down a little. I'm going to make it even more compact. I cut it off right at about at the gill plate. So now I'm going to thread that up. Have it come out. You can see that's our weight system, and this little boot tail will actually create a lot of vibration. Now in this case, you can see that's our little tiny swim bait ready to roll right there. So we're going to get him in the water. I'll straighten up my weed guard, and I'll show you a few fish I'm hoping. a nice one. Not a giant, but man, in this current they fight strong, but it's a good one. Come here. Good chunky river fish, 2.5 pounder. Hook's got him pinned just perfect. That little 2-aught, just perfect. So this is almost a different technique for a swim jig. I call this kind of like floating a swim jig. So if you're fishing current, I'll throw it out. So most of the fish are going to be along like a, you know, a current seam or something. And one of the reasons I love a swim jig, I know it looks like I'm almost fishing an Alabama shake, but I'm not really. I'm kind of just popping my bait to keep it a little bit higher in the water, but really to just allow the current to kind of sweep it down that cut bank, you know. And at the same time, it allows me to keep an eye on it, because if the fish are really tight to the bank, they're not going to chase the bait out as far as you would think. So your bites are going to come really pretty tight to the bank. So if I can float it and allow my bait to be swept 6 or 7 feet down the bank and keep it in the strike zone, which is close to the grass, that's all I'm doing. Every time I pop it, the current kind of can just take it a little bit further. So it's not really an Alabama shake. I'm not trying to keep it right on the surface. I'm just trying to keep it off the bottom and allow the current to sweep it. But you can see, I mean, that fish had it perfect. It's just, I don't know, I've always felt like smallmouth just like to pop the bait, come up and hit it. Spotted bass are the same way. And if you got a bigger, bulkier bait, a lot of times they don't get it in their mouth as good as you would like them to. Little chunk. Bait's still in great shape. Just on a little current seam. That guy felt like a little tap and they come at you, you don't even know. But that's one of the reasons a swim jig is so good, because I'm only fishing a couple foot of water. So like the prime zone, you know, might be the little spot, you know, that's tight to the cover. But then, you know, you always have some fish that are out just roaming. So that's when you can turn it back over into more of your swim bait style. Oh, yeah. God, these are chunks right now. Come on. Little chunks. We did miss him the first time, but he really came up and just boiled on it, it looked like. I don't know that he actually had it. I saw him come up, swirl on it. I saw my bait just get whacked, but it never like disappeared, so they never actually ate it, I don't feel like, but still a cool bite. You gotta love it when they come back for it. And one thing I want to point out too, you know, a lot of people, there are some other what are called like finesse swim jigs on the market, but really what that means is it's a lighter wire hook. This is the same hook that we use in our 4-aught. It's just a 2-aught, so it's just a shorter, same, you know, heavy wire hook. So you can really hammer these fish. You know, I'm not throwing on super heavy gear. I'm throwing on 15-pound test. Medium heavy 7.3. This is the NMB 873 blank. So it's a 7.3 medium heavy fast action rod. But I'm not, you know, you got to hit these fish hard to like move them out of the area. If you don't hit them hard, they're going to get you right back in the cover. So you really got to wench on them And this little 2/0 hook is super stout. That's a good one. God, they are chunky. That is a nice chunky smallmouth. So one other thing to point out too that I've gotten a couple questions on. So with the 2/0, you can see the weed guard is a little bit longer on this than if you were to compare it to like the 4/0 size. It's actually the same weed guard. The reason we did that is because we recognized that when we went with a shorter weed guard, we were getting stuck more. You just don't have the same snag resistance ability. So I wanted to go with a little bit longer one specifically so that I could still throw it in the same places that I would throw a traditional jig. I needed it to be as weedless. Remember, with this Estella hook like it has, you can still skip this thing all over the place. You can fish it the exact same way. Again, it's the same profile, just smaller. But that's why the weed guard's a little bit longer, just so I was getting, so it's just a little bit more snag resistant. Doesn't hurt hookups, doesn't do anything, but allows you to swim it through some of that thicker stuff that you wouldn't be able to do with a shorter weed guard. That feels like a good one. Oh yeah. That's a nice one. He destroyed it. Down there. Right, perfectly centered. Right down the middle of the face, floating into a tree. Yowzers, that's a nice one. Not super long, but he's still probably 3 1/4. I'm in the tree. I'm talking about how this is a great bait for fishing, like a traditional swim jig, and it 100% is, but one of my favorite ways to fish it is open water swim baiting. So if you've got a position, if you've got a place where you like to fish a small swim bait, try throwing this little swim jig. It's a different profile. So those fish that have been seeing little Kitex and little boot-tail swimmers for years now haven't seen this. And a lot of times what I'll do at that point, if I know I'm going to be fishing in more open water, is I'll actually just break the weed guard off. There's no reason necessarily to be using it in that situation. Or you can just bend it down and lay it flat along the body if you don't want to break it off completely. That way, if you want to fish it like this, you can just bend it back and put it in position. But keep that in mind, it doesn't have to be fished like this. It's a really good open water bait, like clear water, open water. And I know I'm talking about spotted bass and smallmouth. It's a great largemouth bait as well. Don't sleep on it from that standpoint. I just specifically created it for situations like this, as you can see. I mean, the hookup's been perfect today so far. That little hook is just drilling them, and I'm having fun. This is such a fun way to fish. So it's pretty important in a situation like this to watch your bait. There's really defined current seams. So right now my bait's really almost in slack current. But then once you hit the main seam, it gets shot downstream. So it's important to know where your bait's at, which is one reason I like to float it. It allows me to kind of see where it's at. And I know right now it's pretty slack. all of a sudden it hits right there and it gets washed right downstream. So I know where my strike zone is, and I know it's helping me keep my bait in the strike zone, which is every bit as important. The other thing I want to point out too is, you know, most of these banks are really cut. So from that standpoint, like when you're fishing, don't be afraid to fire your bait like into the grass and then just pop it out and let it fall right on that cut, because that's where a lot of your fish are going to be. And the only way you can pull them out is to get your bait as close as possible. You know, we've got, I would say, about normal water conditions in this river, and you can see, like, you can see up here how there's a little bit of root, but it's pretty much a straight drop off. And that's not the whole case, not the whole river, but like where I'm fishing right now, I can see there's a little bit of a branch sticking out there. I don't know if it's a branch or a root from that tree, but a lot of times that's where your fish are going to be. You know, there's just a tiny little indent right there. And that means there's going to be a little bit more slack water there than on the tip of that. You know, it's maybe only, it comes out maybe a foot, and it's just like basically a rounded little point. But that rounded little point is probably undercut, and there's going to be some fish that might use that. So if you can put your bait like, oh, I thought that was one, I hit a little branch. If you can put your bait up, like really up into the grass like that, you have a good chance at putting your bait in the strike zone. If you're afraid of hitting that grass, you're probably already starting too far away from luring that fish to your bait. The other thing I'll point out too is a lot of your bites, generally your bites are going to happen in two places. They're going to happen really quick by that undercut bank, or they're going to happen right where that heavier current seam is. So in this case, you know, it's probably 8 feet from the bank. If I don't get bit in one of those two spots, I'm probably reeling up and making another cast. But that's why a swim jig's so good. I can throw it up in that grass, fish it very much as a jig, and then if I don't get bit along the bank, I can just reel it out like a swim bait, and you get bit sometimes out on that current seam. Get over that. Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Took it right out of the grass. Having trouble, guys, having trouble. Oh, just came out. That's why we throw the little finesse swim jig. Chunky river bass. Yes, sir. And there he was. I was gonna say there should have been one there. That's a good one too. Just such a nice current break. Might be the biggest of the day. We're gonna go for it. Well, I think we're gonna end it with that one. Beautiful chunky smallmouth, probably pushing 3 pounds. Guys, get yourself some of these little core tackle swim jigs, the 2/0 size. You can see this is the same one I've been throwing. Trailer's locked on based on our weight keeper. Just got bit on my nose by a mosquito. This thing is smallmouth spotted bass candy. This is Goldilocks color. That's my favorite for fishing these rivers. But check them out, guys. I'll put a link in the video description for you. And I'm gonna fish a little bit longer, but you never know if you're gonna catch a video fish to end on, so I'm ending it with that one. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned. We'll have a new video coming out tomorrow.